You're on a yacht in the south of France and get lost at sea. Your phone has no signal, and the GPS stops working. There's no way you could swim to safety. Your chances of surviving are pretty much zero. Today's story is kinda like that, but swap the sunny vibes for the Côte d'Azur for the freezing winds of Antarctica. And instead of calm blue waters, picture a sea packed with towering ice as far as you can see. Oh, and forget about phones or GPS. Those didn't even exist back then. So yeah, getting through something like that is basically impossible. But for the crew aboard the Endurance, this wasn't just some what-if scenario. It was real life. And yet, they survived by leaving their ship behind. Fast forward more than 100 years, and scientists finally found their vessel deep in the ocean. Now, new 3D images are helping us bring one of the greatest real-life survival stories to life. Alright, from the top. Back in 1914, the Anglo-Irish explorer Ernest Shackleton pulled together 26 men for the boldest adventure of their lives, to cross Antarctica. We're talking about the toughest places on Earth, a frozen wasteland with brutal winds, long dark nights, and freezing temperatures that can drop below minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. But for the crew of the Endurance, getting there just sounded like a good time. So, on August 8, 1914, they set sail on their maiden voyage. And by October of that same year, they made it to South Georgia Island. From there, they'd finally head toward their main goal, the Weddell Sea, on the coast of Antarctica. This place is known for its brutal winds, thick sea ice, and freezing waters. Yep, not exactly the coziest place to be. Only 2 days after they left South Georgia, the Endurance ran into a bunch of thick ice, and they started moving super slowly. Thick slabs of ice locked around the ship like a slow, silent trap. At first, the crew waited. Maybe the ice would break up. Maybe the ship could push through. But days passed, then weeks, then months. The ship was stuck, completely wedged into the frozen sea, unable to move. It was February. A small patch of open water suddenly appeared a little way ahead of the Endurance. There was hope, but getting there wouldn't be easy. The ship was still surrounded by solid ice, completely blocking the way. Some of it was nearly 18 feet thick. The crew worked hard all day, cutting a narrow channel through the ice. The next day, they tried again. They even used ropes to pull away huge chunks of ice, each one weighing around 20 tons. But the space they cleared was too small for the ship to build up enough speed. And to make matters worse, the ice was already starting to freeze over again. At some point, the captain decided they needed to stop. More months went by, and the ship was totally trapped. They even saw some cracks in the ice here and there, but nothing could actually help them. And then, things got worse. The pressure from the ice wasn't just holding the ship anymore, it was crushing it. You could hear the timbers groan and the hull creak. Bit by bit, the ship started to break apart. Then in October, a year later, Shackleton had made the call. Abandon ship. And he was right, because in November, the Endurance gave in to the pressure. The front masts collapsed as the bow was crushed. A few days later, the stern was lifted out of the ice, and then the whole wreck dropped into the ocean. And just like that, the Endurance was gone, buried beneath the ice. Okay, but what happened to the crew? The men grabbed whatever they could and set up camp right on the ice, stranded in a world of nothing but white in every direction. No radio, no help coming, and no way to know how long the ice would hold. For months they drifted with the frozen sea, camping on moving slabs of ice, always alert. Eventually, they climbed into small wooden lifeboats and started rowing through freezing waters, dodging towering icebergs, battling waves that soaked them to the bone. It was exhausting, freezing, terrifying, but they kept going. Finally, they landed on an isolated rocky stretch of land called Elephant Island. Their first solid ground in over a year, but it was uninhabited and offered no real chance of rescue. So Shackleton picked 5 men, loaded up the strongest lifeboat, and set across 800 miles of open ocean to try and get help. The journey took over 2 weeks, and they faced everything that could drive any man to madness. Storms, freezing spray, and waves the size of small buildings. But Shackleton kept his positivity. Losing his men wasn't an option. Thanks to his amazing leadership, they managed to reach land. They landed on South Georgia Island, but on the opposite side from where they needed to be. That meant they still had to trek for 36 hours across the island to finally reach the whaling station on the other side. Thankfully, they made it. If you were in their position, you'd probably take a hot shower and curl up in a fetal position for a couple of months. But that wasn't an option for Shackleton. He didn't rest. Instead, he immediately started working on a plan to get the 22 men who were still stuck on Elephant Island. After several failed rescue attempts, the authorities finally lent Shackleton a tugboat. That's a type of boat that moves other vessels by pushing or pulling them. When they were approaching Elephant Island on August 30th, 1916, the captain saw something. A smoke signal coming from the shore. Yep, against all odds, everyone survived. As you already know, the ship didn't make it. It completely vanished until 2022, when it was finally located on the seafloor, at a depth of roughly 10,000 feet in the Weddell Sea. It made headlines around the world, and the footage of the Endurance showed that it was beautifully preserved in icy waters. Its timbers looked brand new, and its basic structure was still intact. The wreck was covered by sponges, sea anemones, sea lilies, and starfish. It was all amazingly eerie. But how's it in such good shape? Even though it looked like any other ship of its size, it wasn't. The Endurance was built to survive tough ice conditions. Every detail was planned for maximum durability. The joints and fittings were cross-braced for strength. It was made of thick oak and Norwegian fir planks and covered in greenheart, which is a really strong wood. The bow was built to face the ice directly. Each piece of timber came from a single oak tree, shaped to match the curve of the ship. That's what helped them survive in the ice for so long. At the end of 2024, specialists did the first 3D scan of the ship. They used underwater robots to map the wreck from every angle, taking thousands of photos. These were then stitched together to create a digital twin, and now you can check it out online. Forget about getting close to the wreck, though. I mean, Antarctica is still one of the most remote places on Earth, so just getting there could be a huge challenge. As the world warms and the ice in the polar south continues to melt, specialists think there will be more chances to access the wreck, but they want to keep it protected. There's even been talk about how to preserve the Endurance. One idea is getting cruise ship owners to agree not to go anywhere near the wreck. So yeah, it's probably safe to say that people in general will probably never get to visit it up close. At least, not in the near future.
The Nemi ships were massive vessels built by the Romans over 2,000 years ago, complete with marble floors, colorful mosaics, and even plumbing for luxurious baths. Unlike the typical ships of their time, which were mostly used for transport or battles, these were true floating palaces. But the Nemi ships weren't just feats of Roman engineering and luxury. Their story is a wild one. Lost, found, and lost again, these vessels became the focus of a mysterious saga that's puzzled historians for centuries. The first strange thing about them is related to where they were found. These huge wooden ships were lying at the bottom of Lake Nemi, a volcanic lake with still calm waters, located about 19 miles south of Rome. For ages, local fishermen knew about the wrecks, and rumor has it they were taking advantage of that. They'd use grappling hooks to pull up pieces and artifacts from the Nemi ships, selling them at the markets. That went on until 1446, when some noblemen decided enough is enough and started looking into the legends about the Nemi ships. They realized it wasn't just a fish story. Both vessels were actually sitting about 60 feet deep in the lake, and from there, the mystery only grew. When you think about it, 60 feet isn't that deep, and Lake Nemi is pretty small, only 1.1 mile wide and about 100 feet deep. So why build such massive ships in such a small lake? It doesn't really make sense, especially when we find out who built them: the Roman Emperor Caligula. You know, the one known for being one of the cruelest and most unpredictable Roman leaders. But one thing almost everyone can agree on was his impeccable taste for all extravagant things. Caligula spent money like crazy. It's generally assumed that he blew all the imperial treasury in a year on lavish festivals, feasts, and pampering animals. Yep, he supposedly fed his favorite horse oats mixed with gold flakes. Anyway, he loved excess. So again, why did he build two massive ships in such a tiny lake? Experts think Caligula might have built them there because of the lake's connection to Diana, the deity of the hunt, the moon, and nature, who is worshipped at a sanctuary on the northern shore of the lake. By the way, Nemi is a modern name that we see on today's maps. The Romans used to call the lake Speculum Dianae, which means Mirror of Diana. So it is possible that Caligula saw this as the perfect place to hide away and dock his pleasure barges. He wanted extravagant floating palaces, and that's exactly what he got. The Prima Naie, which means first ship in English, was an enormous 230-foot-long vessel. It's almost as big as today's largest passenger aircraft, the Airbus A380. The ship's hull was split into three main sections, with the back wider and the front narrower. It had two big structures at each end, connected by stairs and hallways, giving the ship an odd look, unlike anything else from ancient times. The Seconda Nave, or second ship, was even bigger. It was in deeper water and farther from the shore, making it harder for people to reach it, which also helped preserve it better. The ship was 240 feet long and 79 feet wide, with a kind of building at the back and a smaller one at the front. Even though the front and back structures were missing at the time the ship was discovered, you can still tell they were there from the way the decks were laid out. These ships were absolutely incredible. They were built with the finest materials. Elaborate mosaics made up the stunning floors, bursting with color, and high-grade marble added a touch of elegance and luxury to the interiors. The ships also had 10 banks of oars, baths, galleries, saloons, and even gardens with vines and fruit trees. Yes, gardens, on a boat. Caligula clearly wanted these ships to be his own private paradise. It's said he threw wild parties on board, where his bad behavior knew no limits. This included having scandalous relationships with the wives of his generals and senators. These ships were definitely designed to impress, showing off not only the wealth and power of the emperor, but also the amazing technical skills of Roman engineers. Evidence suggests that the vessels had technologies we thought weren't developed until later. They had advanced plumbing systems, with some sources suggesting they even had running water. There's evidence of bronze pipes and lead drains, which is insane for ships built in the 1st century. Another thing is that wooden beams were covered in lead to keep away shipworms, those tiny mollusks famous for tunneling into and digesting wood. But the engineers' efforts were a bit pointless in this case, since shipworms don't live in fresh water. There's also a theory that one of the ships had a rotating platform. We still don't know its exact purpose, but it may have been used for the revolving presentation of a statue, probably of Diana, or for entertainment purposes, like guests enjoying their meal while slowly spinning and taking in the view. Who knows? All of these findings have led experts to believe the ships were mainly built for recreation or ancient rituals, or maybe both. Basically, the true purpose of the Nemi ships remains a mystery because there is no solid historical documentation talking about it. Now, even though these ships were technological marvels, they didn't last long. They had only been in use for about a year before Caligula's reign ended. Eventually, the ships were damaged, filled with stones, and sunk to the bottom of Lake Nemi. This brings us back to the story of their discovery. In 1446, they confirmed the wrecks were there, but no one could get them out. Then, in 1929, Italy's leaders decided to drain the lake to rescue the ships. So they pumped out 65 feet of water. It took years to get them out of the mud, but the second ship was finally raised in 1932. During the excavation period, archaeologists found a bunch of precious artifacts from the wrecks. Little by little, vast anchors, bronze decorations, and marble statues came up from the depths, along with fancy oar rings, bronze joints, and copper roof tiles. The cost of these ships must have been astronomical. Recovering the memories and artifacts of Roman times was a very important thing at the time, so taking the ships out of that lake was a huge win for Italy. In 1936, they decided to build a museum to showcase the wrecks and let people visit. But their story took a tragic turn. As you probably know, this was a time really messed up by global conflicts, and Italy was no exception. In 1944, a fire broke out at the museum, destroying the ships and all the important archaeological contents. Okay, so we may never know for sure who started the fire, but we do know the largest ancient ships ever discovered were lost in it. Only some bronze pieces, a few charred timbers, and some other artifacts that were stored in Rome survived. But just like a phoenix, the vessels came back from the ashes thanks to a lot of hard work in rebuilding. After the restoration work, the museum in Nemi was reopened in the 1950s. If you ever visit it, maybe you can see a part of a green and red mosaic floor from one of the ships, which, funny enough, got lost at some point and was used as a coffee table in a New York apartment for over 50 years. With all the tragic twists in the Nemi ship story, who knows? Maybe there are still pieces of these floating palaces hidden in different parts of the world.
Nearly 140 years ago, some fishermen pulled pieces of a ship from Lake Michigan. But where was the rest of it? From that moment on, hunters spent years searching for the ghost ship. By the 1970s, the hunt reached a new level. One with a $1,000 reward offered to anyone who could find it. Still, nothing. It was as if the vessel had simply vanished into thin air. That is, until now. Researchers have finally found the shipwreck off the coast of Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. The ship called the F.J. King disappeared back in 1886. At that time, this 140-foot-long vessel had a very important job: transporting grain. Now you might think, grain? Really? That's it? Okay, sure, it's not like the ship was loaded with tons of gold or jewels. But we have to see the bigger picture. At that time, Wisconsin was known as America's breadbasket. The state produced huge amounts of food, especially wheat. In fact, about 1/6 of the nation's wheat was being harvested there. Farming was booming, and that, of course, meant big money. The F.J. King was part of that golden era.
For about 19 years, it successfully carried and traded grain and iron ore through the Welland Canal. That is, until September 15, 1886. That day, the crew were on their journey to carry iron ore from Michigan to Chicago. It was supposed to be just another routine trip, but they were caught in a powerful storm. The conditions were brutal, with waves nearly 10 feet high. The crew fought desperately to get the water out and keep the ship afloat, but the waves were too strong. They kept coming, one after another. The men worked hard until they couldn't go on anymore. The waves were splitting the ship's seams. At this point, a catastrophe was inevitable. So Captain William Griffin gave the order, "Abandon ship." They had no choice but to get out. The men grabbed their belongings as fast as they could and climbed into the ship's small yawl boat. It was 2 a.m. Everything around them was dark. As they tried to get closer to shore, the F.J. King went down, bow first. And then suddenly, boom! The crew watched in shock as the ship's stern deckhouse blew off, sending the captain's papers 50 feet into the air. They stayed in the small boat until they were picked up by a passing schooner called La Petite. The crew took them to Bailey's Harbor, and moments later, Captain Griffin filed a wreck report. That's when the real mystery began. In his report, the captain said the ship had gone down about 5 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan. But that was just what he thought. I mean, it wasn't based on any instruments, readings, or anything like that. It was just what he remembered from that night. A week later, though, a local lighthouse keeper spotted the masts of a schooner sticking out of the water, much closer to shore. He reported it to a nearby newspaper, and that's when people really started asking questions. Could that be the FJ King? Even though they had a solid lead, it didn't take them anywhere. No one could find the boat. Days passed, then months, then years, until 2025. That's when an investigator named Brendan Baylod decided enough was enough. He gathered a team of about 20 scientists and historians to finally track down this historic shipwreck. They dug through hundreds of original documents about the ship and the day it went down, piecing together clues and narrowing down the area where it might be. Many experts were like, "Man, just let it go." And to be fair, they had every reason to feel discouraged. After all, that whole area had already been searched over and over. There was just no way the ship could still be out there. But Bayod didn't give up. Okay, truth is, he also thought it was a long shot. But working to find the ghost ship had other perks. His team wanted to get some hands-on experience with a brand new super advanced sonar. With that in mind, they set out on their mission, heading to Lake Michigan on June 28th. Okay, great. But where do you even start? First, Bayod had to clear something up. Back when the wreck happened, who was actually telling the truth about the ship's location? The captain or the lighthouse keeper? Getting that answer would point them in the right direction. Then, Bayod thought about something that might have already crossed your mind. How could the captain really know where they were? It was pitch black. He'd just been struggling to keep his ship afloat. He couldn't see much. He was exhausted and probably hungry. He definitely wasn't thinking straight. That's when the investigator realized the lighthouse keeper's directions were probably more accurate. Thankfully, he found the newspaper article from 1886. You know, the one I mentioned earlier, where the lighthouse keeper gave a more specific detail about where he'd last seen the ship's masts. What the investigator did next was draw a 2-square-mile grid around that location, and the team decided to map the lake bottom inside that grid, using their fancy tech. So, there they were, aboard the Shoreline, a tour boat that usually carries sightseers along the peninsula. But that day, they didn't really expect to find anything. Their only goal that afternoon was to test their new side-scan sonar, one with much greater capability than the previous model the crew had been using. But then, after about 2 hours of searching, something strange happened. The sonar was sending out sound waves to map the dark floor of Lake Michigan when it started to act a little differently. And as the images began to stitch together, they revealed a shape that was impossible to mistake. A ship. Bingo. They'd found it. Turns out the wreck was less than half a mile from where the lighthouse keeper had said it would be. At this point, some of the crew had to pinch each other. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were shocked, not only because they'd found the ship so quickly, but also because of how well it was preserved. You see, the investigators were hopeful, but they also thought the ship would be shattered into pieces. After all, it had been carrying iron ore, and the weight of all that metal could have torn it apart even more. But no. To everyone's surprise, the hull was almost completely intact. Sure, the front right side was crushed, but the rest of it was pretty much there. The investigators even found the crew's belongings and kitchenware scattered across the lake bottom. Once they got over the shock, they called in archaeologists to examine the site and create a 3-dimensional model of the wreck. This is the 5th major shipwreck Bayod and his team have found in the last 3 years, but the truth is, this region is full of mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. The FJ King is just one of around 6,000 ships that were damaged or destroyed in incidents across the Great Lakes during the 1800s. And it's estimated that hundreds of these wrecks still remain hidden at the bottom of Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Thankfully, discoveries like this one could become more and more common. In fact, more shipwrecks are being found today than at any other time in history. Advances in technology have made scanning the lake floor less expensive and more accessible, not just for professionals, but for amateurs too. And the profile of these modern-day shipwreck hunters has changed. Now, they're more often searching for wrecks for their historical value, not just to find treasure. Another project that could help uncover even more wrecks in the Great Lakes is called Lakebed 2030. It could change everything, as its goal is to map the entire lake floor. And right now, only about 15% has been explored. That means the Great Lakes might still be hiding their biggest secrets, and that, at the very least, is super exciting.
It's June of 1857. A fierce storm slams into Geechin Bay, Australia, and rips apart a Dutch ship weighing 800 tons. Part of the crew tries to escape in a small boat, but only 9 of the 25 men on board survive. Now, many years later, researchers believe they've found this long-lost gold rush shipwreck. Yep, this ship is tied to one of the most dramatic high-stakes chapters in Australia's history. We're talking about the shipwreck of Koning Willem de Tweede, a vessel built back in 1840. This historic ship discovery is a big deal since it's now considered a real treasure in the world of underwater archaeology in Australia. Let me tell you why. By the middle of the 19th century, Dutch ships were carrying not just goods, but also people from Asia who were hoping to start a new life in Australia. And they were all chasing one thing: gold. Yep, the precious metal was discovered in Australia in 1851. Well, officially at least. It was actually found a few years earlier, but let's just say the authorities decided to keep that little detail away from the newspapers. Anyway, the big public discovery happened in 1851 when an Australian gold prospector named Edward Hammond Hargraves led an expedition in the New South Wales region, and he chose to tell everyone about his find. And just like that, the gold rush began. News spreads fast, so people start arriving from everywhere: Britain, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, and also from China. It's estimated by that time around 20,000 Chinese had made their way to the gold fields in Victoria. By 1861, about 3% of the Australian population had been born in the Asian country. Most of them came from the southern region of Guangdong, which was going through a really tough time back then. They'd been through it all: foreign invasions, massive floods, serious food shortages, you name it. Many people had lost everything. Their money was gone, their homes destroyed. They couldn't even afford a bite to eat. There was no clear way out of the poverty they were stuck in. But then, word started to spread. There was a goldfield somewhere in a distant British territory. They heard stories from people all over the world going there, that it was peaceful, full of opportunity, and that the land itself had everything you could need. It sounded like a dream. Before long, they began calling it Xinjin Shan, or New Gold Mountain. So, many scraped together what little they had left to reach Australia and start over. It was a shot at a better life, a chance to lift entire families out of poverty. But getting there wasn't cheap or easy. They had to travel in huge ships, and the average trip from Guangdong province took about 3 months to reach Sydney or Melbourne. At some point, Australian authorities decided to impose a tax on Chinese arrivals. Every passenger who disembarked at Victorian ports had to pay a 10-pound poll tax. So what do you think happened? The routes changed, of course. Instead of docking directly in Victoria, ships began stopping in Robe, a town in the southeastern part of South Australia. From there, people would walk about 250 miles all the way to the goldfields just to avoid paying the tax. And this area is exactly where the Koning Willem de Tweede was discovered. Yep, our Dutch ship was found off the Robe coast, and it was one of many vessels that carried Chinese passengers to Australia. Now you can see why it's historically important, right? On the 16th of June, 1857, it brought around 400 people safely to shore so they could start their lives over. The ship itself didn't get a happy ending though. After dropping them off, it was supposed to continue its journey, but then a storm rolled in. So the ship had to drop anchor and wait it out in Geechin Bay. The weather kept getting worse. The anchor began to drag, and by the 13th of June, it was completely lost. The captain, called Hendrik Geisen, had to act fast. He made the call to beach the ship in hopes of saving both the vessel and his crew. But there was a problem. The ship ran aground on Long Beach, about 3 miles east of Robe, and it started breaking apart quickly in the rough seas. The rest of the story is tragic. 16 sailors drowned when one of the ship's small boats turned upside down. only 9 men made it out alive. Captain Geisen stayed aboard the wreck. He eventually reached the shore by clinging to a cask. Thankfully, people who were on the beach managed to pull him out of the sea using a rope. A few months later, things from the wreck were sold to a local man in Robe named Jacob Chambers for £225, which was a pretty big amount of money back then. And that's because people were able to save a good amount of stuff from the wreck, like the bell, some doors, and wooden planks from the hull. Those doors and some of the timbers were later used to build the Caledonian Inn, a historic 2-story stone hotel that went up in 1859. As for the bell, it was supposedly used at Robe Primary School for over 100 years, but researchers aren't so sure about that part. What we do know is that most of the ship's remains were still missing, until now. After 3 years of hard work, a team affiliated with the Australian National Maritime Museum believes they have finally found the Koning Willem de Tweede. The project kicked off in April of 2022, and its main goal has been to search for, locate, and carry out an archaeological survey of the shipwreck's remains. To do that, they mainly used 2 tools: underwater metal detectors and a marine magnetometer, a device that detects changes in the magnetic field of the seafloor. Soon, this technology started picking up a bunch of anomalies in the area where the shipwreck was believed to be. And by anomalies, I mean weird signals. Clues that something might be buried under the seabed, probably hidden under layers of sand or mud. They believe those signals were coming from the iron parts of the ship's windlass. That's a big winch at the front of the ship used to pull up the anchors. Some of those pieces were sticking up slightly from the seabed, along with a partially exposed iron frame. They also spotted a well-preserved wooden plank underneath the windlass, which suggests that more of the ship's hull is still down there, just buried under the sand. So why do they feel confident that this wreck is the Koning Willem de Tweede? Well, basically for 3 reasons. First, the location. The spot where they picked up those signals lines up with historical accounts of where the ship went down. And it just so happens to be the only known shipwreck in that part of Long Beach. Second, the size. The cluster of magnetic signals roughly matches the ship's documented length, which is about 140 feet. Third and last reason, they found pieces of Chinese pottery from the 1800s right on the beach next to the site. When you put all those facts together, it basically screams Koning Willem de Tweede. That's why the team feels so confident they've finally discovered this historic ship. But even though they have good reasons to believe it, more research still needs to be done, so they're planning future visits to the site to keep monitoring things. The goal is to check the ship's condition and look for more parts of the hull or artifacts that might get uncovered as the seabed shifts over time. Let's hope they get lucky next time around. For years, the world's most valuable shipwreck was just a legend, until now. It has finally been found, and among the wreckage was a real treasure worth $1.1 billion. To understand this better, we need to go back to 1622. That year, the mighty Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Atocha set sail from Havana, packed with riches belonging both to King Philip IV of Spain and to the wealthy members of the crew. We're talking about gold, silver, copper, and emeralds from Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Venezuela. The cargo was so large, totaling more than 40 tons, and so vast that it took 2 months to transport it to the ship. The ship was also packed with people. There were 265 people on board. At first, everything went well, but then came the Florida Straits and trouble. The crew found themselves lost in the night that was not only cold, but also stormy. And before long, they were facing a powerful hurricane. The wind tore the masts apart. Giant waves destroyed the rudder. And soon, the Atocha was sinking toward the darkness of the seabed. The disaster that night meant a huge loss of wealth for King Philip IV. But even worse was the loss of life. Of the original 265 crew members, only 5 survived. They managed to climb up the mizzen of the ship, the only part that remained above water. With all that treasure gone, the Spanish were quick to spring into action and devised a salvage operation. 5 ships were sent to recover the cargo. The plan seemed simple and easy. After all, the hatches were securely locked, so the treasure could still be there. But almost immediately, things went wrong. For example, one of the 5 ships ran aground before it could even begin its journey. In the end, the search dragged on for 60 years, and many factors contributed to the mission's failure. That may not seem so bad today, but back then, divers didn't have the technology or safety equipment that we have today. Exploring the seabed was risky, and more often than not, it led nowhere. While searching for the Atocha, the rescuers found traces of another vessel, the Santa Margarita, the Atocha's sister ship. Another hurricane passed through the region a month after the sinking. The seabed became a jigsaw puzzle with pieces of the ship scattered everywhere. The rescue mission became almost impossible. Over time, the Spanish managed to recover part of the Santa Margarita's cargo, but Atocha's treasure seemed lost forever. Even so, no one forgot that story. Then in 1969, more than 300 years after the sinking, everything began to change. An experienced deep-sea diver, Mel Fisher, stepped in and decided to rewrite history. Mel had already spent a big part of his life at the bottom of the sea. He and his wife even ran a diving school in California. So, Mel gathered his family and moved to the other side of the country. He led a new team of hunters whose mission was clear: to find the lost treasure of the legendary Atocha. They had little more than a boat, some diving equipment, and metal detectors, but that was enough to get them started. They focused on a region called the Matacumbe Keys, mentioned in several 17th century documents. In the first year, they traveled more than 100,000 miles but found absolutely nothing. It seemed like an impossible dream. But Mel still had a card up his sleeve: Eugene Lyon, a historian who would change the course of the search. Eugene delved into the Spanish archives in search of clues about the shipwreck. It was there that he found an important document that mentioned a group of people trying to save it. On the last page, it was mentioned that an area 100 miles from where Mel was searching had been the scene of the main exploration. This little piece of information was the needle in the haystack they needed. They rerouted the ship and soon arrived at the new location. But there was a challenge. That part of the ocean was deeper and the visibility there was almost zero. It was difficult to see your own hands. However, Mel knew how to deal with the adversities of diving and came up with a simple and brilliant solution. He installed 2 large tubes on the boat called letterboxes. Those tubes could be lowered in front of the propellers. The idea was ingenious. They sucked clean water from the surface and directed it to the bottom of the sea, exactly where the divers were. This technique not only cleared the murky water, but also helped to reveal objects that had been hidden for centuries. And still, the search took 16 years. During that time, Fisher found many lost items. Then, in 1971, they discovered a huge anchor. This was the first clue that they were close to finding the Atocha. In the following days, more objects appeared. Cups, swords, and ancient nails turned up. To keep everything organized, the team created a circular map. On it, they marked the exact location of each item they found. They also used radio transmitters on land and a receiver on the boat, which allowed them to know precisely where they were. The system was so efficient that it could measure the position with a margin of error of just 1 foot. Over time, a line began to form on the map, pointing to where the Atocha's main treasure might be hidden. They followed this trail for 2 years. Just when they were starting to lose hope, they found silver bars. It was the year 1973. This opened the door to much bigger discoveries. The silver alone was worth over $100,000, but the real treasure was yet to come. On July 20th, 1985, valuables that would be worth around $1.1 billion today were finally discovered in the main hull of the ship. The treasure included 180,000 silver coins, 24 tons of silver bars, 125 gold bars, a collection of pearls, and 66 pounds of emeralds. Some of these finds were priceless, not only because they were rare, but because of their history. The Atocha cross, the royal orb, and the Atocha ring, 3 royal artifacts, were found in near-perfect condition. The Atocha cross was the most valuable of all the artifacts. It had 9 brilliant green emeralds set in 22-karat gold. A true treasure from the past, shining once again after centuries underwater. Soon after the discovery, the state of Florida thought, wait a second, we want a piece of that treasure. They went to court, demanding a whopping 25% of the value. A bitter legal battle ensued, and it lasted 8 years. It even went all the way to the Supreme Court. But in the end, treasure hunter Mel emerged victorious. He was even invited to The Tonight Show, showing off a massive gold chain found in the wreckage, wrapped around his waist like a belt. People called it the money chain, and for good reason. The find was so big that the wreck was declared the world's most valuable by the Guinness Book of Records in 2014. After the initial excitement, Mel sold some of the gems, but the bulk of the treasure remained in the family for a while. What was left was auctioned off. No one knows exactly how much the jewels were sold for, but one thing is for sure. Their value has skyrocketed over the years, and it's not just about the sparkle, it's about the legend that lives behind them. Today, these treasures are part of the particular Museo collection, the largest private collection of the Atocha artifacts in the world. And no, they're not for sale. But the good news is that you can still see them. They're on display, shining brightly in homage to Colombia's rich history and the famous mine from which they came. The people behind them say that these emeralds are as iconic as the rubies of Mogok or the sapphires of Kashmir. And honestly, they're right. 360 years ago, a massive British ship, the London, blew up in the Thames estuary. The tragedy took over 300 lives, including the sailors and their loved ones. No one knows exactly what led to all this, but scientists are finally getting close to the truth. Divers accidentally found an exceptionally well-preserved bronze cannon from the ship. This cannon, that was buried in silt and clay for centuries, could have all the answers. The London was a service ship built for the Navy of the Commonwealth of England. It set off on its first journey in June 1656. The ship played a huge role in British history as it was part of a convoy that went to the Netherlands in 1660 to collect Charles II and restore him to the throne. 5 years later, in March 1665, it was traveling from Chatham to Hope. From there, the Admiral Sir John Lawson was supposed to take it to the sea. But just before reaching the buoy of the Knower, the gunpowder suddenly blew up on the ship. About 25 people who were in the roundhouse and coach survived, but over 300 drowned. The ship broke into 2 pieces. Henry Bennett, the Earl of Arlington, passed along rumors that it all happened because of cheap, low-quality gunpowder that was on the ship. When experts of that time inspected the shipwreck, they concluded that the cannons could still be salvaged, but the ship itself was a total loss. Later, when someone recovered some of them, in 1679, there was a scandal where they tried to use them to settle a completely unrelated debt. In 2005, divers rediscovered the London. To protect it, port authorities even had to move the shipping lane, and a team of archaeologists got to work exploring it. That wreck is a big deal because it gives us real insights into English naval history. Visibility in the Thames estuary can be terrible. Sometimes you can't even see a foot and a half in front of you. Working on the site is also super tough because it's in a crazy tidal environment, and a busy shipping lane, where huge cargo ships constantly pass by, is still near. So when a cannon suddenly appeared, stuck deep in the clay, it meant the conditions had to be absolutely perfect. Experts believe the find is from the Commonwealth era, and it's medium size, about 8 feet 6 inches long. It was part of a special set made specifically for the London and was placed on the ship's lower deck. Every single gun carriage on the London was one of a kind because all of its cannons came from different countries and different periods in naval history. Big cannons were really rare and crazy expensive to make since they needed tons of bronze or iron and had to be individually cast. That's why the Navy often grabbed cannons from captured rival ships, old shipwrecks, or decommissioned vessels. The new find is one of the clues that could eventually help scientists to solve the mystery of the London tragedy. So far, they've also found leather shoes, pieces of instruments, wooden tools, rope, and a compass. All these artifacts are like puzzle pieces to them. They still don't have enough evidence to be sure, but it looks like both the pipe and candles could have been sources of flames that set off a larger bang. Some workers made another amazing find at a flooded quarry in nearby southeast England, about 60 miles southeast of London. They stumbled upon the remains of a rare Elizabethan-era ship hundreds of yards away from the nearest coastline. Finding a ship from the late 1500s is a huge deal, because very few vessels from that time have survived. Studying it could help scientists answer some big questions about an important era in history, when England was becoming a major player in European trade. Today, the quarry site is about 1,000 feet from the sea, but back in the 1500s, it was actually part of the coastline. Archaeologists think the ship either wrecked on a rocky headland or someone dumped it there when it was too damaged to sail anymore. Scientists haven't identified it yet, but they studied over 100 pieces of its wooden hull, reading the tree rings, and found that it was built from English oak trees cut down between 1558 and 1580. At that time, Northern Europe was switching from the old clinker method where the planks overlapped like fish scales to the carvel style from the Mediterranean, where the planks are smooth and flush against each other, nailed to an internal frame. Old wood usually rots away pretty fast when it's exposed to air or water. But if it's buried under a thick, oxygen-free layer of mud or silt, it can survive for centuries. That's exactly what happened here. The team is using laser scanning and digital photography to document everything about the wreck. Once they finish their research, they plan to rebury the timbers under the silt in the quarry lake, so the ship can stay there safe for many more centuries to come. A team of archaeologists in Norway found a ship in an even more unexpected location, in a flat field. There's a hill nearby called Gel Mount. It's actually a huge burial monument that the Vikings themselves had built. The farmer who owns the field wanted to dig some drainage ditches, but first, he needed experts to check for anything important underground. Archaeologists used a high-resolution georadar attached to a tractor-like vehicle. When they scanned the field, they discovered that it used to be packed with burial mounds, at least 8 new ones nobody had ever found before. And beneath one of the mounds, the radar picked up the outline of a ship. Back in Viking times, ships were super valuable, so they only buried them with really important people. Scientists have only found 3 boat burials in all of Norway before, and this is the first new one in years. The team believes this ship is from Viking times, probably between the years 500 and 1000 CE. Because the burial mound above it got flat over time, the ship is now only about 1.6 feet below the ground. That's super close to the surface. It's around 66 feet long, and the radar showed that parts like the keel and the floorboards are still preserved. The archaeologists plan to explore more using non-invasive tools so they don't wreck anything by accident. If they need to, they'll start an excavation. Far away from Norway in the Namibian desert, a miner looking for gems accidentally found a legendary shipwreck almost 500 years old. The workers called in an archaeologist to check it out, and they thought it must have been the remains of a Portuguese trading ship, the Bom Jesus, that had mysteriously vanished in the 1500s. The Bom Jesus had left Lisbon loaded with treasures, aiming for India. But somewhere along the southern tip of Africa, a brutal storm slammed it into the Namibian coast. The ship smashed into rocks, broke apart, and disappeared under the waves. When archaeologists explored the wreck, they found parts of the ship scattered across the shore and buried under thick sand, which actually saved the remains from rotting away. They even discovered treasure, over 40 tons of cargo that had spilled out of the captain's chest underwater when the hull broke. There were cannons, swords, fabrics, tools sailors used to navigate by the stars, and most impressive of all, 1,845 copper ingots, solid pieces of metal weighing 16 to 17 tons in total. Scientists could even read the old trademarks stamped on them, revealing they were made by a mega-rich German trading company. And then there was the real jackpot. More than 2,000 gold and silver coins from all over the world, Portugal, Venice, France, and the Moorish states, plus 105 giant elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely on their way to become luxury goods like jewelry and fine carvings. DNA tests later showed the ivory came from West African forest and savanna elephants. They didn't find many bones though, which means the crew either managed to escape or were lost forever at sea.